This is 5 lies about gender roles that are destroying your marriage. If you've ever felt like things are uneven, frustrating, or just don't feel right in your relationship, there's a good chance that some of that is coming from false expectations you didn't even realize you were carrying.
And by the end of this, you might see your relationship very differently, especially when it comes to who does what and why that's been causing tension.
And there's one pattern that shows up in almost every couple we talk to, something that you will want to catch before it grows too far. We'll come back to that before we end. But first, if you're new here, I'm Ryan. I'm on the autistic spectrum. And a lot of what I share on this channel comes from trying to build a stronger, more intentional relationship over the years.
And I'm Lori, Ryan's wife, and I have ADHD. And when we talk about marriage, communication, and roles, we're not just talking from theory, we're talking about what we've actually lived through.
We've been married for 23 years, and most of what we're sharing today came from things we didn't understand at the time and had to figure out along the way. One quick thing before we continue, though, is that we're not therapists or counselors. And if you're in a relationship that feels unsafe or abusive, please reach out to a qualified professional for help. The first misconception about gender roles in a relationship is that roles in a marriage should be fixed or set, that the husband does certain things and the wife does certain things. And that's just how it is. Early in our marriage, we fell into that trap without really thinking about it. We had young kids, and I was more than happy to let Lori handle most of what came with that. Things like appointments, dealing with schools, and walking through diagnoses, especially as we were realizing that our two youngest were on the autistic spectrum. And that meant navigating assessments, working with teachers, and figuring out how to support them when things weren't going smoothly.
And I didn't mind it at first. I had studied education, not just to become a teacher, but because I wanted to be a better mom. But as things got heavier, especially as we started realizing we were parenting neurodivergent kids, it became a lot. And honestly, it had never crossed my mind to ask Ryan for help in the beginning. The way I was raised and what I had seen growing up it just felt like it was my responsibility to carry.
And looking back, that wasn't fair. Lori was carrying a lot more than I realized.
But that created something underneath the surface that we didn't deal with at the time. What was building there was resentment and exhaustion. There were a lot of times where I felt like I was carrying a lot between the house, the kids, the working, and I didn't always know how to communicate that overload clearly. I also just assumed that was the way it was supposed to be, that I just needed to suck it up and do the work. But what can happen is that burnout shows up later in ways you don't expect.
If you're listening to this and thinking, yeah, this feels familiar, but can't quite explain it, we actually put together a free relationship friction quiz. It helps you figure out what pattern is showing up in your relationship so you're not just guessing. You can find the link in the description below. So roles can't stay fixed because life doesn't stay fixed. They have to change as your situation changes. And change isn't always easy, especially when you're on the autistic spectrum and you like things to be consistent. But what we realized is that we needed a system we could adjust, not a fixed set of rules, even if that meant doing things differently from how we were taught growing up in the 70s and 80s. The load around the house isn't constant, especially when adding on demands of neurodivergence. Roles need to shift with the season, with life, and with what's going on at the time.
An example of this is how I need to shift being a partner to Ryan and a mom of autistic kids while having ADHD. I had to navigate what was on my plate and what was falling off. Now that I am teaching and Ryan works from home, he can and does manage most of the household chores. In the summertime, I'm much more available to take on big household projects, and I actually don't mind the summer yard work when I'm on holidays. The second misconception is that equal means doing the same things, that everything was to be split evenly, task by task, or it's not fair. What we found worked better was creating systems instead of trying to split everything down the middle. For us, that meant using lists. Lists work really well for the autistic side of our family because they bring structure and clarity. And when demand avoidance comes into play, which it definitely does in our home, having a schedule or a simple job chart actually takes the pressure off. There's no one reminding or pushing, it's just there. It also lets the kids be part of it, so it becomes something We all share. It's not just his jobs and her jobs. And that pattern we mentioned earlier, this is where it starts to show up. It's when we expect things to be equal in a very specific way instead of understanding how each person actually works.
And this gets even more important in a neurodivergent relationship because you're not wired the same. We don't process things the same way. We don't handle stress the same way, and we don't have the same strengths. There were times where I thought things needed to be equal in a very specific way. And part of that was how I was measuring things. I was basing effort on what I could actually see. If I'm organizing, cleaning, fixing things, I can see it. But what I didn't see as clearly was everything Lori was managing. She kept track of life, handling communication with the kids and school, thinking through some problems before they even showed up. Her ADHD was a strength when seeing all the things that still needed to get done, but didn't show up on a checklist. I was just looking at the list and wondering why she didn't follow it too. I don't necessarily enjoy cleaning, but I do like things being clean, so I end up doing it. I take care of some things that I find fascinating as well, like making sourdough bread or growing herbs hydroponically. When there is a system to build or something to put in order, I'm all in. Taking into account what each person is actually good at or capable of in that moment helps support our relationship and our family.
And from my side, the way I approach things looks very different. If I see a full list of everything that needs to get done, my brain doesn't just see the list. I see every step required to complete every item all at once. And that can get overwhelming really quickly. So I've learned how to break things down, prioritize, pace myself just to get started. For example, when I go camping, I'm focused on just a few things, making sure we have shelter, food, and comfort. But Ryan is different. As much as he loves camping, he's always doing something. Honestly, I get a little dizzy watching him take care of it all. When you try to force an even split on roles, the pressure can actually make things worse. Equal doesn't mean the same. It means you're both contributing in ways that actually work for who you are.
And when you're only seeing part of the picture like that, it's really easy for resentment to build up. Not because effort isn't there, but because it's just not being recognized. This leads to the third misconception, which is that certain areas of life belong to one person. Like one person handles the kids, or the home, or the finances. Research from the University of Alberta by Matthew Johnson in 2025 shows that traditional gender roles in household labor persist, with women completing over 6 more hours of household work per week than men, and no tasks being equally shared overall. Sticking to similar divisions worked for us for a while until it didn't. When we were newlyweds, we discussed who wanted to be in charge of what, but as things changed, like careers and incomes, it made sense also to change some things. When our kids were younger, I let Lori handle a lot to do with the kids, the household, and even earning money on top of that while I was in school. But over time, that created a real imbalance we didn't fully see because even though I was contributing in other ways, she was carrying something I didn't fully understand.
As the mom, taking on too much at once is not always obvious at the moment. You just keep doing what needs to get done, but over time, it adds up.
And then life changes in a way that forces you to look at it. Schedules shift, jobs change, illness happens, and the kids need a different kind of support. In our case, I was suddenly at home more, taking them to appointments, getting them out the door, being involved in school things I hadn't really handled before. And that's when it became clear the way we had things set up before wasn't going to work anymore. We were trying to adjust what we were doing while still holding on to the old expectations of who was supposed to do what. And this is where a lot of couples get stuck. You can't assign whole areas of life to one person and expect it to keep working. It has to stay flexible. And being autistic, flexibility is not something that comes naturally to me. Even as an adult, a visual schedule or a list help with readjustments, and using these tools is smart.
The fourth misconception is that the man must be in charge rule. And this one can get a bit tricky, especially in a neurodivergent relationship, because being autistic can come with a tendency to follow rules. But stay with me for a second. Sometimes the rules we're following aren't actually coming from how your brain works. They perhaps shouldn't be rules at all. and they are just coming from old gender roles. Being the man of the house does not mean you need to be in control, make all the decisions, or have things done your way. If this rule following creates a my way or the highway tone in the home, I guarantee the neurodivergent members of the household will most definitely choose the highway over you. So the question becomes, is this rigidity or following the rules of being in charge actually an autistic trait? Or is this something learned from outdated gender roles and expectations?
This is one that hit me pretty hard when I started to see it, because I did have a very clear idea in my head of how things should be done. And when things weren't done that way, it felt wrong to me. Not just different, but wrong. I think part of that is how I'm wired, but part of it is also the belief that as the husband, I was supposed to be leading, deciding, and setting direction. Even if I never said that out loud, it was there. And what that created was pressure on me to always be right, and pressure on Lori to either follow that or push back against it. And that's why we created the relationship friction quiz. It helps you see what's actually going on underneath all this, so you're not just going off how it feels. And you can find a link to that in the description below.
And from my side, that can feel really heavy because even when I understood why Ryan needed things a certain way, it could still feel like there wasn't a lot of room for how I do things or how I think or what I needed. And that's where things can start to break down because it stops feeling like a partnership and starts feeling more like a one person in charge and the other is trying to fit into that.
And once we started to recognize that, things began to change, not all at once, but enough to start changing how we work together. Because a marriage isn't meant to be one person leading and another person following. It works better when you're actually working together, even if that looks different than what you grew up seeing.
Thank goodness we were both raised by wonderful sets of parents, especially forward thinking, strong willed women that coached us in our lives. It's important to recognize the difference between supporting our spouse through their weaknesses and strengths or giving away our voice as a partner in the relationship. As a partnership, we need to counsel together, make sure we're on the same page and running things together.
The fifth misconception is that gender determines who should be good at what. But in real life, it really comes down to the individual and what you're good at and what you struggle with and what you can actually handle. In our case, Lori is much better at staying calm and connecting emotionally, navigating school systems and thinking outside the box and seeing the bigger picture. And I'm better at structure, details, organizing, and following through with multiple things that need to get done. And honestly, those differences make us a pretty great team. But if I'm being honest, a lot of what we naturally gravitated towards doesn't look like what you'd expect from a typical couple. I'd be perfectly happy staying home, making sourdough bread, cleaning and organizing the house. And at the same time, I also enjoy fixing things and working on my projects. So I've never really fit into those traditional roles.
And when we started leaning into that, things got easier, especially when it came to parenting. Ryan brought a level of consistency and structure that our neurodivergent kids really needed. He helped create routines that made their day feel more predictable and a lot less overwhelming for them. And he understood how they were experiencing the world in a way that I couldn't. That mattered so much more than just being around occasionally or trying to fit into that dad role, whatever a dad role is supposed to look like.
And this is where things start to make a lot more sense for us, because it wasn't about trying to fit into roles anymore. It was about recognizing what each of us actually brings and making space for that.
When I look at Ryan now and I see all the strengths that he has, I don't see something that needs to fit into a role. I see qualities that make our relationship stronger. And it's not about his role and my role, or even yours and mine. It's more like, oh, you're good at that. Okay, you take that, and I've got this over here. And then we support each other in it. Sometimes that looks like stepping in to help. Other times it just means appreciating what the other person is taking care of.
And that made a big difference. Before that, we were trying to measure everything and who's doing more, who's doing less, and who should be doing what. But when you think like that, it's really easy to miss what the other person's actually doing, especially when it doesn't look the way you expect. And when you come back and really look at it, you can start to see that both people are contributing just in different ways.
And those differences aren't the problem. They're actually what make it work.
And when you stop forcing those rules and start working with your strengths, things feel a lot more natural. And that pattern we mentioned before in the beginning, this is it. It's when expectations don't match reality and both people end up feeling like they're carrying more than the other.
A lot of the tension couples feel isn't because they're doing something wrong.
It's because they're trying to follow expectations that don't fit who they are. And when you start letting go of those, things can get a lot easier. If you want clarity on what's actually happening in your relationship, go take the relationship friction quiz. It'll help you identify your main pattern and give you a place to start. The link is in the description below. Now that you can see how a lot of this tension can come from expectations around roles, you might see how easily that can start to build into something deeper over time. And for us, that turned into resentment. So we'll watch this video next. In that video, we break down what resentment actually looks like and how it builds and what to do about it. When you understand that piece, a lot of what we talked about here will make even more sense.
Even neurodivergent couples can make relationships work, right?